you and Gretch.
Thank you, Stevie. Democrats have come a long way since the 2012 campaign when they routinely accused Republicans of waging a war on women.
Remember, it started when Rush Limbaugh used a word that, well, rhymes with smut, quite frankly.
Right.
And Democrats tried to then say that Republicans were to blame at large. Well, now that Democrats like Anthony Weiner, Eliot Spitzer, and Bob Filner are waging a real war on women, many of those same outspoken Democrats are now silent. So is there some sort of a double standard? Joining us now is Sabrina Schaeffer, Executive Director of the Independent Women's Forum, with her thoughts. Good morning to you, Sabrina.
Good morning, Gretchen.
So is there a double standard?
Absolutely. Look, first of all, it's funny to me. It's absolutely hypocritical. But what's interesting is just how unabashed and unapologetic Democrats and progressive feminist groups have been about this. I mean, we don't really expect Nancy Pelosi or any of the Democratic leaders to get up there and call for Anthony Weiner to drop out of the race. But the progressive women's groups should be appalled by this, and they are not taking a stance. I mean, Emily's List, the Nation's Katrina Vanden Heuvel, Jessica Valenti, a sort of self-proclaimed feminist activist, they've all said that this doesn't count. This kind of philandering doesn't count. As long as you support paid leave, then prostitution's okay.
Sabrina, will this be reflected in voter attitudes this November and next November when they realize how two-faced many of these Democrats are on this issue?
Well, that's the good question. I mean, I think that, look, Democrats are so skilled at holding on to this war on women rhetoric. They've sort of muffled the whole conversation by Nancy Pelosi putting out her new women's economic agenda. I think the best thing for Republicans to do is not to go tit for tat here, right? I think they are going to lose every time. But I think what they could do is put out a very strong, positive economic message. I think that's the way that they could sort of benefit come November and beyond.
Interesting advice. Okay, let's take a look at some of these cases. Back in 2012, Harry Reid condemned Limbaugh, as we were talking about, for those comments about Sandra Fluck, calling them embarrassing to our country. But this month, with Anthony Weiner's aide, used similar words. There was no response from Reid.
Right. Well, I mean, look, first of all, Rush Limbaugh's comments were not exactly elevating in terms of sort of helping the public conversation. But of course, we don't expect Harry Reid to really speak out here, but it's despicable. Of course, he should say something about Anthony Weiner, Eliot Spitzer, Bob Filner. These men are not just, I mean, this is not just what's going on in someone's marriage. This is the way that they're publicly treating women. Bob Filner, I mean, these are women on his staff.
Right.
This is not something to just be sort of waved aside. And the fact that there hasn't been any kind of public outcry, of course, looks ridiculous.
Sabrina, in 2012, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the head of the Democratic National Committee, criticized Mitt Romney for not condemning Rush Limbaugh's comments. But again, this month, not a word about the Democratic aide working for Anthony Weiner, who made similar comments. How can they get away with this with a straight face?
I know. Well, the bottom line for them is, how do we expand government? How do we have, sort of unfettered abortion rights? How do we have bigger, more expensive, more intrusive Washington? And if that means that we have to put up with some inappropriate Twitter feeds, or we have to go along with the prostitution ring, then that's okay, because ultimately they want to see government-run health care. They want to see expanded paid leave. They want to see a raise in the minimum wage. And it's not okay to have an argument or a conversation about these issues. These are sort of accepted widely now by the left as generally good for women, when in fact there is a conversation to be had.
All right, in 2012, President Obama placed a personal phone call, remember, to Ms. Fluck about Rush Limbaugh's comments, and said it didn't belong in the public discourse. So what about the aide to Anthony Weiner, who was called a similar name? Remember, she wrote an article critical of the Democrats' campaign, but there was no phone call there. Is it dicey for a president to get involved in these kind of personal situations unless you're going to do it in both similar situations?
I would think so. I mean, Gretchen, I think you and I both would think that this looks pretty calculated, pretty political. I don't think that anyone really believes that President Obama is so concerned about women unless we're talking about the women's vote.
I just wish that the women's groups would actually do what you're saying, and that is to support all women, no matter what. Just take party affiliation out of the equation and just support all women in these types of situations. Sabrina, interesting thoughts this morning. Thanks so much.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
After years of delay, we are now just about 1 hour